Alright, so we do have the worm gear right here. We're putting it back together. It's pretty straightforward. There are these two little bearings that go on each side that actually fit inside of the housing that holds the worm gear, and you'll see that here in a second. So I put those bearings on each side of the actual shaft. The shaft, the worm gear, whatever you want to call it. And then inside the casing, you'll see that black rubber gasket. So I didn't replace that. It wasn't leaking out of there. It looked like it was in good shape. I had one to replace it with, but that does pop out, and it does come with the gasket kit you can buy. Just cleaning up around the edges here. Make sure when I put it back together, it gets a good seal, a good fit. And then on this, where I'm cleaning it up around, there's a metal gasket that goes on there. But you'll see that black ring on the inside. That gasket is supposed to be replaced and does come with the rebuild kit. Again, I did get the rebuild kit for $69, and it really does come with everything. I got it on Amazon. So that washer goes in there. All right. I put that in there, and then the shaft goes inside of this housing, and there's a bearing inside that housing that I greased. And you'll notice on the input shaft there, let's see, there are two bolts. There's one that I'm screwing in, and then there's a tightening. That's the locking bolt, but the bolt with the holes on it actually screws it into the housing. You want to make sure that you see where I use the pliers, you want to make sure that bolt isn't too tight. If you tighten it too much, it presses on the bearing, and it doesn't allow me to, it'll press on the bearing and it won't allow you to move the input shaft too much. So make sure when you tighten that, you're not going too crazy. Okay, so this is for the output shaft. That is the front plate / cover for the output shaft. There's a bearing in there that I've greased up, and then there is also a gasket on the outside. There's actually two gaskets on the outside. So there's that big gasket on the outside. We're going to take it off with this little dental pick here. And actually, I apologize. There is only one gasket on the outside of this. The other gasket is actually on the front of the cover. So it's on this cast iron piece that you see down there. And then this just slides on to the output shaft. You'll see you could just press that on, and there's no specific spot it needs to be in, because that output shaft can either be pushed a little forward or a little backwards, depending on how you adjust that bolt that's coming out of the output shaft. So that bolt is like your tension bolt. So if you have any slop in your steering, you can tighten or loosen that, and you'll see how I end up doing that once we put it into the cast iron housing. Now you see that green gasket, that little green one, what I'm cleaning around, that also needs to be replaced as well. So let's replace this gasket. Alright, so this was me putting the output shaft into the housing. It was a little tricky. It's a 6mm Allen key. You have to kind of adjust it into this sweet spot. And then remember, when you're turning the Allen key, you're turning it lefty-loosey. That's how you actually pull it through the housing. So make sure you turn it lefty-loosey, and then once you get it through the threads, you'll feel it pulling through. Right? Once you have it pulling through, that's when you can adjust your cap. As you're putting this cover back on, once you tap the outside cover back on fully, you're gonna have 2 seals, and you're gonna I'm singing there. You're gonna have 2 seals, and you're gonna have a snap ring. I looked at the way my old seals were put in. It's gonna be 1 seal, snap ring, outside seal, which is probably just the cover, and you're gonna put them in the exact same way they came out. Alright, so this got me a few times. When you're putting in your worm gear, you want to go just past the second indent on the first hole. You see where that first bearing is on your left? You want to make sure that barely the second indent on that worm gear is where you put your little ball bearing in. And then once you get it right about there, you'll slowly start turning it and adding these ball bearings. So I add one, I give it a turn, I add another one, I give it a turn, and I make sure they don't come back into the housing behind it. I just keep going forward so I could screw this all the way in. Now what I want to show you here is you'll notice I used a magnet to pull a ball bearing from the back of the piston as I was putting the ball bearings and screwing the worm gear in. If that happens to you, start over. It just means your worm gear was too far in. They should not, or your ball bearings are binding up. They should not pop out of the back like that. You should not have to take them out of the back. Start over if you have to do that. They should all fit in with 8 left over to put in the housing you'll see me install next. Now this is the housing. I used a zip tie to hold it together. There are 8 ball bearings left in there. I used a zip tie to hold it together, and I put grease on the ends of each ball bearing so they didn't fall out as I slipped it in. Once you're finished, your ball bearings should be pretty flush like this, and then your other 8 ball bearings should be in that housing. So once you grease everything, you put your housing back in with the 8 ball bearings, you bolt it down. You're basically ready to put the piston back into the casing of the power steering box. don't forget to put the lock tabs up on the metal piece when you bolt in your extra bearing housing. Alright, so this part actually took me the longest. So you see the output shaft right there. That output shaft needs to be spun all the way upwards. And you see the grooves on the piston? So I didn't do this the first time. You'll see I just slid it in. I turned the gears from the output shaft so they didn't interact with these grooves. And I just slid it right in to the housing. Now the problem with that, the gears aren't meshing, so don't make that. So I had to take it back out, and once I took it back out, you'll notice what I did is I turned the output shaft gears all the way up, and as I dropped in the piston, I made sure that the first output shaft gear interlocked with the first piston gear, and then you could see I screwed it down. It kind of meshed together. It allowed me to pull it down, so now the gears are matching. And then as the head is on right, you can see I'm going to turn the input shaft and then the output shaft starts to move. And remember to put your gasket on and put it in the right spot so that you actually get lubricant to the correct places. And once you've done that, you're ready to start putting your bolts on, getting everything tightened down. And you should be able to
I think that's
connect it back to the Jeep. So if you guys have any questions, concerns, please let me know. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I have a lot more footage. Until then, thanks for watching. See you next time.